It
Will it flip over?
auto reverse. It flipped
Good.
over.
But when Bill Monroe had been coming up with his sound in the 30s, and when he took on Earl Scruggs with his style of playing, which developed out of older styles, but he was a pretty serious departure. He was young, and I'm telling you what, you've never heard anything quite like some of the live performances of a guy named Doc Hamilton, who is now up in Bowling Green, Kentucky. Lived here for years, big part of the bluegrass scene. He gave me some tapes that a fella made, and he got a hold of them because Doc knows everybody in the world. Back in the 40s, in the very early years, I think about 46 or 7, after the Bluegrass Boys had been playing for about 3 or 4 years on the Opry. And this guy had a little like a cylinder recorder or something, and he'd make records of the bands and then sell them to the band because says, "Memento, you were on the old Grand Ole Opry. Buy one of these and you'll have to take on with you." I guess that's the story I was told. But the Doc managed to get a hold of copies of tapes of these things, and they were the recordings of George D. Hay introducing these guys and playing before an audience that was wild. Like, remember the Beatles? Like, the same sort of thing, because it was this intense music, and there were a lot of young kids who were very interested in that music in the 40s. And so it had a really big, serious feel. Now, I think in the 40s, the advertising, broadcasting conglomerate hadn't gotten its shit together very well. And so this music was still on its own. And the radio was there and was seriously making inroads and helping us form all of our opinions about everything. But at this particular time, it is true that while a lot of this is contrived nostalgia, there was a pretty serious presence of the older forms and strings and ways of being. And a lot of them are pretty goddamn powerful and echo up to this day, although most of the people who have any close association of that sort are gone and going. So when this was going on, it was a thing of immense power for people who listened to it. They thought it was just incredible, and it influenced them heavily, and record sales, of course, followed with that, and with the growing of the record industry from the 20s and on through the 30s and 40s. It was a market that they pursued pretty actively, because pretty much in those days, the record industry was finding anything it could find to make some money. And by the 40s, the sound had traveled pretty far to Texas, and there was a lot of interest in Texas in bluegrass music among folks who grew up here, dancing and playing the Western swing. Of course, Bob Wills made it for the Opry eventually. But here there'd been a whole different thing going with the early Western swing bands, Milton Brown and Musical Brownies and Light Crust Doughboys on up into the 30s, and then a real fascinating time in the late 30s, into the 40s, into the late 50s, when there was some seriously good music being made. But by then, although it had given its name to a category, country and Western, because before they didn't know what the hell to call it, it was being pretty much generally ignored, and you had the Nashville sound was taken over by the late 40s and early 50s. But bands that played up in Dallas and around here, Texas, Top Hands and San Antonio, and here in town there was a bunch of bands that recorded Buck, was it fiddle player? Not Ryan, Buck Buchanan had band, and there was I've got some information on this to show you that all around there were dances and dance halls, and people played a whole lot. Tommy Duncan, who was with Bob Wills, singer for a long time, went on in the 40s and 50s and had a number of bands, and they'd play around it, and all up into there. And so there was a period in the 40s when there was a really good swing, a lot of folks listening to it. And which I can remember. The Dolores and the Bluebonnet Boys was one of the bands that you hear around here, and they play at places like Threadgill's and out at what is it place over there, east town, the dance hall. It's been converted here recently. I don't remember. Not really what it ought to be. It'll come to me in a minute. But that was going on. At the same time, there were people moving here from the east, of course. And in the late 50s and early 60s, there was still music that folks who grew up around here and grew up around the dance halls and things. And the way the dance halls were is a lot different than they are now. Johnny Gimble is somebody who can tell you a lot about that. And how the dances and things they'd have usually on Sundays were for the whole family. You know, the kids would come and it'd last all day long and into the night. And there might be some drinking going on a little bit later, but old folks, kids, everybody danced. And that's what was really good about talking about earlier, you know, that now it's like generations are taught to latch on to a kind of music because it helps to sell them, and people are competitive, I guess, by nature. And so if they go, my generation, this is my music, and I'm going to hang on to it. But you know, you go to these shows in those days, as I was told, because I didn't live there, that kids would be there, old folks would be dancing, you know, all in the afternoon. And of course, at night, then it'd be the young people would be more to be there to meet the opposite sex and to maybe sneak out and have a drink or do things like that. But
well, we're tying this into CTBA and that coming up.
So that's it's where we're kind of getting at. So there was this whole, you know, round another. Well, just I'm mad because I can't remember the name of that hall. It's so.
It recently reopened, didn't it? I know what you're talking about. It did a few shows last year. It hasn't been.
Yeah. It's a great name too. Yeah. But so there was a whole lot of people who still had the kind of community that Johnny Doherty had lost, who were still, and the music was part of it, and it was who they were, and it was who this town, what this town was. And I'm talking, of course, about the Anglo community, because that's what I grew up in, and at the time, it had a very strong identity, much like the older Mexican community had this very strong identity, and the music was very much a part of it. Well, by the 50s, late 50s and early 60s, especially into the early 70s, you see that a lot of country music was changing significantly, because I don't know what reason it happened. I don't think anybody does really. I'm sure it had to do more with accountants than anything else. And I think it's as they were trying to just milk as much money as they possibly could, and the Beatles were a big hit, and so they tried to get them closer together, because the whole idea, I think, with the music industry is to make it all interchangeable and replaceable, and that way, as long as you can get some guy in a hat who doesn't sound much different from some guy in leotards, then you're doing all right, and you're going to make a lot of money. So the people who lived here still want to hear music, and bluegrass is very close to that, because it's honest, it's straightforward, it's from the South. It has all the things that people long for, because you can't just keep listening to the old records over and over again.
Right.
And a lot of the guys who were hanging around, like the AFTM, Dennis McDaniel was a really great person. The kid who started, he's not going to stop talking, but he's a wonderful guy. They had a hard time getting him to start talking. Mandolin player, he and Doc Hamilton. It's very, very well respected, and it's a very specific style of playing. Bluegrass is something that has very high standards of musicianship, and it's, of course, this is the perception that you're always given of the Beverly Hillbillies and all this kind of stuff by the idiots who have nothing under their hairdo who write these things. The musicianship is held to the standard, and you can tell who's good and who's not if you're in it. And it's also, I guess, it survives because of a lot of that, and it's an interesting hybrid because it's a new kind of music. I mean, it's one of these wonderful contradictions. It itself is a serious departure from the old music. It's centered around one personality, Bill Monroe, who pretty much put the sound together and gave it its very distinctive sound. He was a mandolin player. The way he played and the way he sang while came right out of Rosine, Kentucky, had his stamp on him because he was a very, very strong personality. And it resonated. I said that back in the 40s, and it resonated such that it became a style, and it had standards, and in order to gain acceptance among those who played it, you had to be pretty damn good. You had to come up with new variations on the old themes, but you had to know how to do them. To do this, you got to know how. And so what that meant was, and it's something that is not easy. It's pretty all-consuming. If you're going to play good bluegrass music, you pretty much immerse yourself into it. And it's sort of like any traditional form. Like with James Galway, the flute player, will do things with the chieftains, but it's always kind of a novelty act because he doesn't play any traditional style because it's a completely different instrument for one thing. Although there are people who can play keyed flute and make it sound very traditional, his focus was entirely different, and he's never going to be able to be a musician in the same sense that a Matt Malloy is or Seamus Egan. Mm-hmm. The same thing is true, I think, a lot for bluegrass, but it's approachable to a certain level. I mean, you can get in and chunk the chords and play, but when it comes time to take your break, then the ones who can really do it are going to show, and they're the ones who immerse themselves in the sound and the style and really have it. And so folks who are, and it attracts a certain type of personality too, I think, and it's people who are very dogged and determined about one thing. And at least and that's not always true. But those folks often characterize the bluegrass community, and it's kind of a good thing. Like I was telling you, I used to love to get phone calls. I loved the phone calls that come on Saturday morning because you can never tell who it's going to be, and it can be just anyone, from somebody saying oh, I sure wish you'd play something or other, or it can be somebody who's going to say that's not bluegrass.
Right.
I always had a great affection for those guys because they were assertive about what they thought is what they thought I ought to be playing, because this is here.
Yeah.
And it's where it is. It seemed like it was it had that sort of feeling to it. And so the organization that they formed is very focused towards bluegrass and bluegrass events. They don't, and whereas they become much more cooperative over the years, also because a lot of the members of that community, especially back in the 70s when there was pretty serious political divisions coming out of the Vietnam War, these were Merle Haggard types.
I was going to ask you, would you characterize the old-timey guys in the AFTM kind of group as, we're grossly generalizing now, as
Sure.
just kind of looser, hippier?
Oh yeah, you have to generalize to make sense out of one another in a world that has so many weird stuff in it. Yeah, definitely.
The old-timey folks are just...
The old-timers are going to be, well, because a lot of the interest that came out of that was through, I think, a lot of dissatisfaction with the folky wokey revival in the 60s. Yeah. There were people who came up and they saw Pete Seeger and these guys strumming banjos and doing that kind of stuff, but then they stumbled from a smoke-induced confusion or something and wound up hearing Tommy Gerald play that round piece. Now, that would be long-haired guys who are really similar to those hillbilly types that he came from, people who lived on the margin, who liked living in the hills, didn't particularly like wearing suits and going to the factory and going to the offices. They just seemed dig coal and play the fiddle.
You think the bluegrassers were more, especially as we move into the 70s, they were more...
Oh yeah, absolutely.
right side of the divide of all those cultural wars.
Definitely on the right side of the divide. But there was always back and forth because the music is really good and it's got strong roots to it. So a lot of people, if you go back to the 50s, of course now they're, you know, the cultural division that we've become so used to and kind of fond of, I guess, in a morose sort of way, existed in different terms than we can really understand in the 20s and 30s. You know, and for us, let's talk about these things. The world fell apart in the 20s, but that kind of divide, I don't know, existed, I guess, as things changed. And of course, this is all conjecture because I see it secondhand. I wasn't there. I can't know from reading and from drawing inferences from people that you meet and their memories that if you grew up here in town, Jesse James and his gang, that was another really big band in town here in
Bluegrassers or
old time? I mean swing, 40s and 50s, late swing band. Jesse James and his gang, they were really good. Baldy Rambo was a fiddle player. Those guys were. That's an interesting story there. That somebody was telling me about. You can see his face. How a lot of the swing bands play here in town, and swing music, the Western swing, had interesting chord progressions, and they would try to vary and come up with really cool and interesting melody lines and get them more complex and wound up on themselves. And so they had a lot of chords. You had to use 9 chords and 13 chords and suspended fifths and moving passing tones and a walking bass. It was full, musically very full and interesting. Could be anyway. The story I was told is that when they first came up with rock and roll started to get to be kind of popular, and I guess the late 50s and stuff, they call it square music because it's very square. They're just 3 chord, you know, the same progression over and over again. And these guys, you know, in the 40s they had grown up from like Crustville Boys and Bob Wills and up into the big thing off in California with Spade Cooley and Johnny Lee Wills and all these folks who were using pretty big bands at the time, pretty sophisticated swing music. And so when they heard this rock and roll come on, man, that stuff is square because of the lack of chords. But so these guys were much like the contest fiddling. It was music that really had its connection deep in the people who lived here in this community, different communities in this area. And for the most part, those were not intellectuals, because you have to remember this is primarily a raw resource producing state for most of its history until fairly recently. Oil was still the big game in town, and it hadn't been that long since agriculture was the big game in town. And you know, in my father's time, when he was a kid, I mean, they lived on the edge of town, and he didn't have shoes, and he could remember plowing with a mule when he was a kid. And you know, those times are gone from us, and lots more than just the preceding the generations that come. Each generation is going through generational changes now. So the guys were here, and the bluegrass music, I think, filled a void for a lot of people. Ones who didn't lose interest in music completely, because, like I said, you couldn't keep listening to the same old records over and over again. So they played bluegrass music, and a lot of folks that down at the Manchac Fire Station, they have their Friday fish fry down there. A lot of old-time serious bluegrass, and all over Texas. There's bluegrass festivals, in Grapeland, and Canton, and Overton, and all around. Just slews these little festivals, but they are Texas bluegrass festivals. And if you go to one, you don't see people in tie-dye shirts dancing around. You see a lot of white shirts, cowboy hat, cowboy boots people You know, and there's like no booze.
And they're not doing old-timey for the most part?
Oh no, not at all.
Bluegrass,
It's
okay.
straight bluegrass. If you hear old time music, you might think, well, pretty quaint stuff. What the hell is that? Never heard that shit before.
Now, you were never organizationally involved in TTBA, were you?
I have been, but not as a member. I've been involved in some things, but haven't, only because I haven't had the time to.
Yeah.
And I probably am going to try to find time coming up. And I've done everything that I can from the perspective of the radio to tell people about things, so that when Saturday comes along, one of the things that I do is subscribe to all the little newsletters, and the internet's been a big help.
Yeah.
To tell folks where the jams are, where the dances are, things that you won't hear from the standard media, because they're just they're too far below everybody's radar.
Right.
So my contribution for a long time has been just to do that, because I deeply admire the people who are involved in it, and admire the music a lot too.
And the Celtic groups also broke off, formed their own group. In fact, that seems to me,
Oh yeah.
Tim periodically sends out the email newsletter
Mm-hmm.
you must get.
Oh, yeah.
And it seems the most constant thing on that is he's just forwarding a message about Celtic events.
I think they have a lot of things going
from
on.
someone else. Tim's the distributor.
Yeah, well, as president of the AFTM,
Right,
he's
but
got
there's
everybody's list and he passes it on.
Right,
It's
he's just taking a list of another group and passing it on. And
all the
who
members.
got that started? You must have been plugged into that a little bit from your own interest.
No, not much. Oh, you mean the
Celtic,
thing?
yeah.
Quite a bit. I wasn't as much into that, because there's as there is with the bluegrass crowd, kind of is a social thing, as all music should be,
Right.
that associated with a certain community, and knowing my history, I've grown up around here with an interest in music as a pure thing. My little makeshift theory we talked about last time, or bits and pieces of it, that there's a pure thing, it's a form that is pleasing on several levels, and it's discernible to folks who are willing to listen in many different streams, whether it's in bluegrass or old time music, or gamelan, for crying out loud. Or there's all kinds of, I find bits and pieces of it all over the place. The thing that is true is that the more you regard it, and the more carefully and deeper you try to understand it and become involved with it, the more rewarding any particular stream is. Unfortunately, we all only have one life. And I haven't learned that lesson yet, even though I can say it, because there's something else which I can't understand at all, and it's what I've always just followed, and it is, I don't know what the hell it is, but it's just what I wind up doing. As I do this radio program, I feel a deep obligation to this place, and the music that was here and has been disowned in a lot of ways, not for that reason, but because it's a thing of great beauty that belongs here. And I made a conscious decision some years ago that I was going to focus my program on that type of music and the community that still exists who listens to us. That's why you hear a lot of Western swing and things like that, because it resonates in this area as it would in no other. Nowhere else in the world on a Saturday, if I play the High Flyers, would I get a call from somebody who used to dance to them 10 miles down the road. Now I might, if I was in Japan, play it and get people calling up saying, "Oh, that's the greatest stuff I ever heard. What is it? It's wonderful. I've got to hear more of it." And that's another wonderful thing. But those are two different events. And if I lived here and played primarily music from Eastern Europe,
Right.
I would get lots of people who called, "Oh, that's wonderful. That's great.
Right.
Wonderful." I used to hear that when I was a kid growing up, and that's one event, and it's a beautiful one. But for some reason, I find that there's almost a duty that attaches itself to the first experience. I remember that. I was here when that happened. And there's just something really good about it. I don't know why. And so I consciously play a lot of that music. Although when I sit down and play music, I play a little bit of that stuff. I play differently because I ain't no good at nothing, which is kind of a liberating condition.
Right.
You can do any damn thing you want, but you ain't gonna be squat for good at it, whatever you do. So, at any rate, the Celtic societies and things like that are often overburdened with what appears baggage to me, and that's I wouldn't say this to anyone. Please don't, be kind to me if you quote me anywhere on here, because I'm not the kind of person to ever want to say anything that would hurt anybody else.
I'm not sure what you mean.
As a good friend of mine once said, I love Irish music. It's all that Celtic shit I can't stand. And a lot of it is just the trappings that come with it, especially the kind that's the most, the least endearing are, the Renaissance fair stuff, where people live in this fairyland that, doesn't even have any connection. It's kind of insulting in a way, because they could be right, there might be little people. But if they saw you talking about them like they were leprechauns, or pretending you were a druid, they might come kick your ass. And I've met some folks from over there. Cathal McConnell was one. Just, that's somebody who's close to something. I don't know what it is. I know a lot of it has cork in the end of it, but he's really got something. That guy can play so beautifully, sing so amazing, and has reservoirs that are just beyond my ability to comprehend, let alone tap to any extent. And then there are folks who prance around in pointy shoes and don't do a very good job of playing the music, and don't have a deep appreciation for it, but like to play act, and wear kilts and things like that. And bless their hearts, it's fine and it's wonderful, but it's that's not the kind of people I like to spend my time around. And so I think that if I lived in Clare, in Ireland, I'd be deeply devoted in playing that music, all the time, and probably doing whatever I could to keep it going, because I have I think a really deep appreciation for that music and for that culture. One of my favorite authors, a guy named Flann O'Brien, Miles McGoplin was also called. He wrote for the Irish Times back in the 50s, and I wrote a great book called That Swim Two Birds. Dylan Thomas had the best recommendation. He said, "This is a book you buy for your sister if she's a dirty, boozy kind of a girl." And one of the things that I've found in Irish music is that I've met some of the most interesting people and some of the most talented musicians, and made some very, very deep and valued friendships, but they're generally of personal nature.
Right.
And the types of social events that I enjoyed the most in playing Irish music over the years were with dancers here in town. There was a great period of time when we played a lot for dancers. And the dancers, this is long before River Dancer and that stuff, which is wonderful. I'm glad it's happened to give those artists an outlet, because they really deserve it, because it's a beautiful form. I just love it. But there's a wonderful dance instructor down in Houston named Paul Tynan, who died of cancer some years ago at an early age, a real shame. But he was a champion, All-Ireland champion dancer, and he had a school down in Houston. And they were tapped into the Irish community in San Antonio and in Houston and down in South Texas. And there are deep roots to that community in Texas. A lot of people aren't aware of it, but an organization you may have heard called the Ancient Order of Hibernians. Well, they're of course very active in Texas, and so they used to sponsor Fishana and things like that. They were completely unrelated to the revival of Irish music that was happening with Planxty and the Bothy Band and groups like that I was first exposed to in the 70s. These were old geezers.
Yeah.
And but they would have the fishana just like they did in the old days. Generally, though, in doing anything, I like kind of see the old guys and talk to them and get to meet those people because they have connections to ways of playing that are really good. And I've listened a lot to Irish music from the 20s. Paddy Killoran, Michael Coleman, and musicians who immigrated from Sligo to New York in the teens and 20s, and just monster genius musicians. And then down in Houston area, there was a set of really good musicians down there. Dan Worrell was a concertina player, a fellow named Olkin Masterson, who came over from Ireland. And there would be these players that would come in and sort of be a focus for the community to gather around. And so we'd play these feshana, the dance competitions and things like that for the Hibs, Ancient Order of Hibernians, and they always kind of funny thing, but it was just a lot of fun to do that, to play the traditional stuff for these groups that really, there'd been a lot of early Irish settlement in Texas, down in a little town on the coast called San Patricio. It was a very old town. Of course, a name like that. But Texas history, when back in the 18 teens and 20s, there was Texas began to get defined by the folks that the Mexican government brought in to take care of the Indians that they couldn't take care of, and of course wound up losing a big chunk when they tried to screw them, because what it is, lured people down here with promises of land, and the whole idea was to get them down here, have them kill off the animals, settle the land, then tax the shit out of them and drive them back across the Sabine River. Of course, that didn't happen. But everybody was trying to vie for new land, and people who really needed it were in Ireland, because those guys were getting screwed big time, and they also happened to be Catholic. Well, Texas at that time, as part of Mexico, was decidedly Catholic, and so there was a pretty healthy immigration into I don't know if it was called Indianola at the time. I know that was its earlier name, Corpus Christi, what it was called later. And then south down to Refugio and San Patricio, which is in Refugio County. And lots of little towns down there were settled by the Irish in the 1820s and 30s. And a lot of them had surnames that were Hispanicized. I was looking not long ago at one of these handouts for an ancient order of the Hibernians. They gave you a little history lesson, and one of the higher-ups in the Mexican army at the time was a guy named O-C-O-N-O-R, Oconor.
Before we get...
I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're
going too far away.
I want to, before we run out of steam, because I know that happens about now, I want to know how you came to do Folkways, because that's obviously a big part of your involvement right now, and it affects the whole community.
It sort of grew out of the same thing. There was a fellow named Lamar Adkins, another person who you ought to meet here in town, who was very active. Another thing besides people who start organizations are those who come in and will just do a lot. Mm-hmm. And Lamar was a very, very busy person, and he enjoyed music a lot. He produced a lot of concerts. Not a musician himself, but he got his energy by doing that. And Lamar knew a guy named Howard, last name, who was at KUT, as program director at the time, and they happened to need someone to do the show. Lamar was doing traffic down there, which is scheduling stuff for the TV station. And so he knew about this job. He said, Dan, I need somebody to do the radio show. And I think I told you when I was a kid, I'd had a show down at WTAW for a while. And I thought, oh, sure, I'll go talk to them and see.
Now they knew what the show was going to be. They wanted to do a folk music radio show.
Folkways existed, and one of the things that's kind of nice about it is nobody really knows when it started.
Is that right?
Isn't that right for a folk?
Yeah, that's right. It's anonymous.
It's been different names. I think it was called, somebody told me that it was called the Sweet Shop at one time, back in the distant past. But I think there had been kind of a folk music show as long as anybody can remember.
So on Saturdays? Or
on Saturday.
Okay.
No, at different times. When I first moved here, it was on Friday night.
Uh-huh.
And Ed Miller was doing it.
Yeah.
Ed did it a long time ago.
Okay.
And really good. I used to listen to it when he did the show, so everybody enjoyed the heck out of it.
Yeah.
It's always been kind of a popular program.
So this Lamar told you?
Yeah, Lamar told me they had this deal open, and Howard, see how bad I am?
Uh-huh.
Jewish guy, nice Jewish guy. He used to work at KPFT down in Houston,
Uh-huh.
and I did some volunteer work at KPFT, and we hit it off, and I felt like I knew the program directly at the time. He said, come in and do it. And program was from 8 o'clock. I think it was even earlier than that.
This is
8
Houston
o'clock.
or?
No, it's here.
Here, this
He
one.
was program director here.
I see, at KUT, okay.
And it was volunteer, it was all volunteer at that time. And since I wasn't making much money anyway, making no money was, so what?
Yes.
And
Then you were on Saturday morning, though?
It was on Saturday from 8 to 10, so
Okay.
a 2-hour shift.
Uh-huh.
And the only thing that made it possible to do it was that I would rotate with another guy. There's a guy named David Oberman. We both started at the same time.
And when was this?
1981.
Okay.
And Dave is a really great guy. He has a very different interest in styles of music, and I think it worked out pretty good because you come with every week there'll be a little bit different flavor to it. You know, people would call me also wouldn't burn us out since we're working for free, and it went over really, really well. We were down in the basement over there where KUT is now, in a little tiny studio about this size, with old World War II equipment, big knobs and tubes and stuff. It was great. And so we just get there in the morning and do that show, and people seem to enjoy it. And over time, it made more and more money, and so they kept expanding it till it got to be, the behemoth it is now, 6 hours long.
Right. So getting the gig was not difficult. You knew your music.
Just being in the right place at the right time.
He just said, you went down and talked, he just said, sure, you do.
Mhm.
Okay.
No, we talked, for a pretty good time about, what I knew. He didn't know too much about it, so it's kind of like the WTAW situation all over again.
Okay.
You know anything about this? Your voice doesn't sound too bad. Give it a shot.
Okay.
And so it just went over, and people enjoyed it. And
Are you 6 hours now or 4? Aren't you saying
6. It runs from actually, I guess it's 8 to 2. I'm on their board for an hour, sort of 5 hours of broadcasting.
Okay.
Used to be 6.
Okay.
And that was the result of a program director who came in a while back and tried to change a lot of things and cut an hour off the beginning, an hour off the end, and put some really lame program canned music in, and did what all of the staff down there, well, not as badly as they feared, but along the lines of what their worst fears were, that most public radio stations subscribe to the same cast of idiocy that governs commercial radio. And that is, you've got this format, and if you do this format, everything will be okay. And the format is somewhat different, rather than being, pop hit 10 to 25 on the charts, and then pop hit 1 to 2 on the charts, and then it's, Prairie Home Companion and the opera and the same canned jazz stuff, and fairly subscribed programs, so they cut down on the number of people they have to deal with and keep their payroll low and do a lot of tape music and still get donations.
Yeah.
Well, the thing that was great, about Austin is it's run completely against the trend, primarily because it's a state bureaucracy that it's under the wing of the state bureaucracy, and as bureaucracies tend to do, they encourage people to mark time.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a guy, I won't call any names, who was there for quite a long time and essentially did nothing, left things alone. And what that meant was that the programming staff, and this is the thing that is runs so contrary to all radio stations now, actually ran the programs. And it happened to occur in a town where there were people like Larry Monroe and Paul Ray and Dave Overman and myself and John Ailey, who had deep interest and love and an opportunity and an audience out there that was kind of along the same way. People who were Austin's is a different place. This would never happened in Houston or Dallas. And so, really by that circumstance, inertia on the part of management and inertia in motion on the part of the programming staff, they wound up making more money at their fundraisers than any station in its class.
Right.
You know, there are like 2 or 3 stations in the country who raise more money than KUT for the listenership that they have, although we are run completely contrary to any of the formulas that you have. So people were worried when a new guy came in, and sure enough, he had been to the same. You know, these guys they're in the business. They go to meetings,
Yeah,
and if you
sure.
go to the meeting, and ask, "What do you do?" So we do a lot of local programming. But you don't do
Yeah.
click and clack, or you don't subscribe to this show or that show.
Right.
And so it means you can't go to dinner parties. I don't know if that's true, but the tendency is going to be to conform, and fortunately, people rebelled, and he had to restore the last hour. The station does have a responsibility, I think, to provide news programming, and even on Saturday nights.
Yeah.
I think it's a good idea, and they've kept that in place, which is why we don't have the full 6 hours of music anymore. But
does anyone consult with you on what's going to go on at any time? Have you had to sit down and justify your playlists, or
Oh,
is
no.
that totally your own creation?
no, they want to get it, and I really wish I had time to give them a playlist because it helps them acquire records and things like that.
Right.
I've been spotty in putting the playlist, and generally I'm so exhausted by the time the thing's over
Right.
that it's calm to go to sleep. But the direction, fortunately, has been to leave the programming staff to do the program. They
Sure.
turned it over 100%, and it's great.
So I think your program is different from Sue's. I
Mhm.
assume
Very
really
different.
quite different from Sue's.
And that's only because the program director there knows the value of the people that he has and lets them do what they need to do and not butt in. And it's a very difficult thing to maintain because people being what people are, if someone comes in with the title of program director, he may do something foolish like try to direct the program.
Right.
And of course, in some cases, you got to have somebody who determines what everybody's going to do. But this is a unique town, it still is.
Have you ever had any scares in terms of cutting off beyond that hour, that 2 hours, cutting it out entirely?
No. Because, well, for one thing, it's always raised a lot of money. It's one of the big money makers on the show, and has been, you know, since we first got started. And I'm surprised in a lot of ways that it's continued. And I'm sort of torn sometimes because the program that I do is very, like I said, focused to music from around here in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And that may hurt the fundraising a little bit on my part, because if you tended to go towards a more generic appreciation, I kind of knew this day was going to become these days too. Doing KUT when it was not 100,000 watts, when there weren't 1 million people in the listening area, it was a very different, much less pressured environment than it is now.
Right.
And I thought, well, some of these days, if I keep doing this stuff, it may get to be where there are lots of pressures to do this, pressures to do that.
Wow.
Fortunately, I haven't felt too much of it, but yes, to some extent, especially now, I guess. As I tend to try to play towards music from this area, I think that probably I'm not able to reach as many listeners who will be more disposed to listen to the things that our version of the popular press tells them that we'll be listening to.
Yeah.
So Austin, what's Austin? Stevie Ray,
Ray.
Willie Nelson, you know, and then you dig a little bit deeper than that, and you get down to things that are more, but still are pretty popular. So you get the
Towns Van
whole bunch of
Zandt.
Towns Van Zandt, I mean, great musicians and stuff like that. But it's been less my focus. It's more what Sue plays
Right.
and things like that. But there are more people who will identify with that. You know, who wins the music polls and things like that. You know, it's not some fiddle player from Gustine.
Right.
You know, it's, and so there's that pressure because they have to keep making money and everything. You've got to keep doing that. And I, you know, since my interest is really neither a career in radio or being a star, I'm always kind of torn with what I ought to do because there's a responsibility to the station as well to keep it going.
They give you a stipend now at least?
Yeah, they do. And several years ago, they said, I think it was a good idea, that they wanted to make it a professional operation because they were growing really fast. They had a 100,000-watt transmitter and new studio, and having a bunch of people who are volunteers makes it difficult to govern folks like that. You can't cut them off. And so for people who, for whom it is their livelihood, you know, that's an important sort of a control device. One that my decision a long time ago, never to try to make that the money from KUT a part of my budget at the house. So like that is money that's really spent as music or whatever, but I just don't count it because I figured that if they cut it off, I wouldn't miss it.
Right.
And if they fired me, all it would be is I get to sleep late.
Yeah.
So it makes it a lot more fun. Because I know that I stay out of the arguments down there pretty much completely. So that, but people who, like John Ailey, a wonderful person, but in any work environment, you're going to have disagreements with people, and you're going to get mad at one another and those kind of things. And if it's your livelihood as well, it becomes pretty important. And that's why I sure would want to make a career choice out of it. It's nice to have something that you can do that's like a career, but it's not.
Do you get enmeshed in the folk DJ stuff like the internet lists or folk alliance conventions or anything like that?
Not a whole lot. There's the folk alliance stuff, a lot of good things, a lot of things that are just irrelevant to me. Because, like I said, the reason I got involved in organizations for this is not some more grand design to build some kind of empire or do something, but merely to sustain the semblance of